This is the only meal in the world you can't buy, and you can't eat it alone.
Nomad, Christian community, mission and the future of the church.
Alright, Waldo?
Yeah, not bad.
Still a greenbelt?
Yeah.
How's your greenbelt experience panning out? The weather's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very on and off, isn't it?
Kind of a bit chilly and cloudy and a bit rainy, and suddenly we're plunged back into the depths of summer.
Yeah. Plus, I'm very tired, Tim.
You are very tired. You and I are so different, Waldo, I'll tell you, for two reasons. One, you're wearing shorts, and I'm wearing most of the clothes I own. The other, I've booked a hotel for tonight. Where did you sleep last night, Waldo?
Well, we came off holiday yesterday, and I didn't fancy getting up early to come here today, so I thought I'll sleep in my van.
As you do.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing you do when you're 19, Waldo.
I know. Well, I sometimes think I still am 19. Yeah, a little bit of adventure. Let's see what it's like.
And your adventure just equalled no sleep.
Wasn't a good idea. No, I got less sleep than I would have done if I'd stayed at home and just got up early.
See, I think once you get into your kind of 30s and beyond, the body's just not as resilient, is it? You've got to look after it. You need a memory foam mattress at your age. At your age, you need an orthopaedic mattress, Waldo. You can't be sleeping in the back of your farrier's van surrounded by... What is in the back of the van? A forge. Horseshoes, hammers.
Yeah.
Anvils.
Yeah.
I bet it really stinks as well, doesn't it?
Well, I don't think you would have liked
How
sleeping
did you sleep
there.
in... Your back of your van is full of stuff.
No, yeah, but I strategically piled it to one side to make a channel down the middle.
Nice.
So that I could...
Channel.
I was like...
You're trying to get to sleep on a bed of iron filings.
Cocoon. I did have a sponge mattress that I was down on the floor, so it wasn't too bad, but it was just a bit cramped, really.
But before that, did you have a good holiday?
Yeah, had a very good holiday.
Yeah, Cornwall.
Yeah.
Campsite, was it?
Yeah.
Facilities good?
Yeah,
I always think you can tell a lot about a campsite through the bathroom facilities. Did they look after your toiletry needs?
Yeah, the toilets are very good. In fact, I have a very funny story about the toilets, Tim.
Is it funny? I'll be the judge of that.
Okay. Well, I went to use the male cubicles, and opposite the cubicles is a big mirror, right? And so as I came out of the cubicles, at exactly the same time that I came out of my cubicle, a really black guy came out of the other cubicle next to me, and I caught his reflection in the mirror, thinking, oh my goodness, I've caught a tan more than I thought I had.
That's not true. That can't be true.
It is so true. But I mean, you wouldn't think...
You saw the reflection of a black guy and you thought it was you, and you'd, over the holiday, got a really good time.
Because the timing of it was... But it freaked me out. I thought, oh my goodness, I've gone over the top this time with my tan. But I actually wonder whether he also saw my reflection and thought that his was
I'm looking particularly pasty.
Yes.
Oh, Waldo.
Yeah, but there you go.
So anyway, back to Greenbelt.
Yeah.
We're interviewing Sara Miles.
Yeah.
She wrote a book. Well, she's written a few books actually. The one I read recently, I think it's called Take This Bread. It's got a bit about her life story, which culminates. She was sort of a war journalist.
Yeah.
South America, atheist, and very sceptical. And for some, I think she just liked the architecture of a church or something. Wandered into this church. There was a service going on. She took communion. Boom! Everything changed.
Wow.
And I thought we've not really explored the whole communion / mass / Eucharist.
Yeah.
So I thought she could be a really interesting person to explore those themes.
We don't talk enough about communion, do we?
Communion is something I find hard to connect with. We were just saying earlier that for all the spiritual disciplines and practices and all the rest of it that I've explored over the years, I've experienced God in many different ways, but never really through communion.
Yeah. We're interviewing Richard Raw at some point, aren't we? I wonder if that might be worth mentioning in that interview with him as well.
Yeah.
As a Catholic.
I don't like it when you mention other future guests.
Sorry.
Because it restricts my... freedom in when
of course, you
upload
upload, so that's...
So now I feel like this one has to be before Richard Raw.
Or you could edit it
I don't even
out.
know that Richard Raw's going to happen, mate.
Yeah, right, okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Sorry.
Because sometimes,
Shall we just not mention Richard Raw?
No, I'll edit that out. So, so we're sat in this press yurt.
Again?
Yeah. It's nice, it's actually, isn't it?
It's very warm.
Yeah, it is really warm,
Yeah.
Just waiting for Sara Miles. She's a bit late.
She is.
To be honest. She's 10 minutes late already. Starting to wonder whether she's going to turn up.
Well, I can just.
I know
wait
she's
and see.
here because we just listened to Nadia Bowles-Weber on stage, and she referred to Sarah many times.
Yeah, and
to
she's
the-
also doing a talk later.
She's doing a talk, yeah. So,
Let's wait and see.
yeah. So we're still in the yurt, still waiting for Sara Miles.
She hasn't turned.
She
up,
hasn't
has
turned up. No. Is this the first time this has happened?
I think it is. I think we've had people cancel before, a couple of days before, haven't
With
we?
good reason.
Yeah.
Pete Rollins got ill once, didn't
Yeah.
he, and cancelled on us.
But never at the point that we're actually going to interview someone.
Yeah, so she literally hasn't turned up. So I don't know what to do now. Do we just upload this? Why are we recording this, in fact?
I know.
Well, I guess
Well, sometime we could Skype.
we could Skype her and then try and seamlessly link this all together and make it sound like she did turn up.
Yeah.
If it's a good Skype connection, we could perhaps... I'm going to have to put in some background music, aren't I, and people talking, and
Yeah.
to make it feel like...
Shall we do a reflection as well? Sort of what
record
we
the reflection now based
so
on what
we think that she'll
she
probably
might,
say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So what did you take from the whole Sara
It
Miles?
was amazing, wasn't it?
It's pretty impressive. It's amazing that someone like a kind of a sceptical atheist like that would be so impacted by something as simple as taking bread and wine, isn't it?
I know. I have had an incident once where communion really did impact somebody, and we did it in Nando's actually.
Really?
Just,
Communion in Nando's?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, in a public place.
Tell me about that.
And I gave everybody the cards with the communion words on it, and just told people to reflect on those words and to take bread and wine when they were ready to do so. And one young woman had asked me a question about she couldn't understand the difference between the nature of God in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and I tried to explain something to her, but didn't do anything for her. And then when she had communion, she said to me, "Dave, it's all right. It's all sorted. It's in my head now. Clear."
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So it kind of bypassed a major... That's really interesting, isn't it? Because that obviously was a major sticking point. for
Yeah,
her.
yeah.
And communion, it just bypassed
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I don't know what happened exactly, but I said to her, "What? So, what do you mean? What happened?" She said, "I can't explain." She said, "But it all just seems to make sense."
Wow.
So,
I guess that's similar to what Sara Miles would have just told us if she'd have turned up.
Yeah.
That she had all this kind of cynicism and scepticism towards Christianity, but that experience of communion just bypassed it.
yeah. In fact, we don't need to interview at all now, do we?
No. I don't know, why do we interview people? We could just chat, and people would find that just as engaging, just as helpful,
They would.
possibly more so.
You never know.
Because one of my concerns is that people just skip through the interview just so they can get to the reflection at the end.
Yeah.
So what else do you think you might want to reflect on had we just spoken to Sara Miles?
I would like to know whether, whether her communion actually was sort of a sombre occasion, or is it a festivity type occasion with communion? Because we often have communion in a sort of sombre way, don't we?
Yeah, that's very true, actually.
But actually, it should be much more of a celebration, shouldn't it?
Yeah, because we're celebrating
The resurrection.
of what was accomplished through
Yeah,
Jesus' death and
that's
resurrection
right,
for
yeah,
us. Yeah.
So I reflect on that.
Yeah, I think if I'd have just interviewed Sara Miles, one of the things that I possibly would want to now be reflecting on is the connection she seemed to instinctively make between communion and mission.
Yeah.
So that whole idea that communion is an open table,
Yeah.
that anyone can come and have and connect with Jesus, as Jesus demonstrated through the Last Supper. He had, Judas was there for one,
Yeah.
who went onto a train. So it's open to anyone. And she just instinctively knew that meant that she had to actively open that table up to anyone. And so that food pantry that she set up was physically based around the communion altar, so that all people would come in to the church and experience something of Jesus.
Yeah, we do I mean, I guess communion is for anybody, isn't it? We do tend to say that we kind of seclude it within church, don't we? We don't, like you say, we haven't used it.
Yeah,
recently, so.
as she would have said had she have turned up,
Yes.
that it is God's meal, not the church's meal.
Yeah, yeah.
Think about that, Waldo.
That's a
Communion is God's meal, it's
Not
the
the church's meal. Yeah. That's good.
That's powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one of the many ways which the church tends to try and control and restrict. The most obvious is, and I say this sort of gingerly, being employed by the Methodist Church, is that in Methodist Church, Anglican churches, other denominations, it's only the ordained minister that can administer communion.
Yeah, I know.
I think that is.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that.
Well, I can't get sacked for saying that.
But priesthood of all believers.
Yeah, exactly,
like you are restricting.
Yeah.
You're radically restricting who can access God's table.
Yeah.
Aren't you? By saying it's got to happen at a certain time in a certain place with a certain person.
Paul says, well, Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me," didn't he? He didn't say, "Go and get a priest to do this in remembrance of me."
And you just sort of watch and then
that's right.
come
You
up
come
when
and
you're
join in.
invited. Yeah.
So good reflections there, Tim.
Yeah.
In fact, maybe more often we ought to do this.
It would certainly make life a lot easier if we could just turn up.
Well, we can have a pretend, the sort of person that we would like to interview, and then think about what they would have said. And
the thing is, I generally read their book before, so I pretty much know what they're going to say.
Yes, that's true.
So, why go through all the hassle of getting up at 5:30 in the morning, driving 2 hours across the country, paying £50 to get into a festival for her not to turn up?
Yeah.
Why bother going through all that?
It also means our listeners have less to listen to.
So everyone's a winner.
We could call it interviews in a nutshell.
Problem is, if you take that to its logical conclusion, we'll just keep trimming it down. Eventually, we'll just think, well, why upload anything? And then people can save nearly a whole hour of their time, not have to listen to any of this.
We could just say, read this book.
Yeah, we could.
Yeah.
So literally, all Facebook and Twitter updates could be just Sara Miles' book.
Yeah.
Read it. It's quite good.
Well, there you go.
Weather's changing again.
It is starting to rain now.
changeable.
I'm glad we're in this yurt.
Yeah, I didn't bring a coat.
In fact, we might. I did, but I left it in the van.
The van's a long way from here.
It is a long way.
I had to get a golf cart ride going from the car park.
Did you pay for it?
Yeah, it's £1.
Somebody told me it was a £5.
It's a £5. You can pay £1 a journey, or
£5 a whole day.
No, it's £5 for 6 journeys.
Oh wow!
I was in B&Q the other day, buying some bits for the house, and they had an offer on it. Something like 98p for one, or 2 for £2.
Somebody had made a mistake there.
How many people went for that offer? Because often with an offer, the temptation is just to go for it. You just think it's an offer, But pay more, and you get.
Are you sure they went £1.98 for one?
It was it was 98 for one, or two.
That's
£2.
ridiculous.
Yeah, honestly.
Did you make any?
The guy, I didn't. I was thinking about it, but the guy in front of me in the queue just went, "What idiot! What idiot! Put that sign up there."
Yeah, I wonder how many people thought, "Oh, that's a good offer." Yeah, like you say. I wonder how many sold.
But then they actually, this is. No one's going to listen to this, but supermarkets do that more subtly, don't they?
Yeah.
They do these bigger boxes, don't they?
Yeah,
so you assume that you're saving money, where actually you're not. You're paying more money.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do we do now? Do we just go home?
Guess so.
I'll pay £50 to get in here.
Yeah.
And then £1 to get on a golf buggy to get
park.
£5 to park. So I'll pay £56.
Yeah. And she hasn't turned up.
I guess we might as well go and see some bands and stuff. Nadia Bowles-Weber, just over there.
Yeah.
See Vicky Beeching.
Yeah.
We're not allowed.
We saw them queuing for tea, didn't we?
We're not allowed over there into that tea room. It's fenced off. You have to have a silver wristband to hang out with the likes of Nadia Bowles-Weber.
Yeah, but they don't have to pay for cups of tea, do they? No. Right, Tim. Let's go.
Let's call it a day.
So, Sarah, welcome to Nomad Podcast.
Thanks, I'm delighted to be here.
Just start off by introducing yourself to our audience.
Yeah, my name is Sara Miles. I'm a writer. I wrote Take This Bread, another book called Jesus Freak, and my most recent is called City of God.
So we wanted to focus on your some of the themes raised in your book, Take This Bread, and there seems to be a unifying theme of food that runs through that book. Was that just a literary device, or was it a theme that you discerned running through your life?
No, I think it's true that food has always been a part of my life. I don't think I'm unique in that. In some ways, I worked as a restaurant cook for a while, and I also had the experience of traveling a lot as a reporter and being fed by people. So in a lot of ways, food for me was a very profound way of connecting with other people, which I think was why Holy Communion meant something to me that echoed experiences that I'd had in my life outside of church.
I mean, obviously food has a significant significance for humans in a very physical way, but as you reflect back over your life, did it symbolise something for you as well?
Well, I don't think you could exactly tease apart the meaning and the physicality, right? I mean, that's what it means to be a Christian, which is that your spiritual life and your physical life are completely mixed up. We're people who believe in the incarnation. So the meaning, what you call the symbols, the depth, the connection that you find, the spirituality of food is not separate from its material.
In hindsight, though, as you look back over your life, can you discern a pathway that led you from being a sceptical atheist to having that first meal with Jesus, i.e. communion?
Oh my God, of course I can, but hindsight, you always are making stuff up. I mean, I can make a really coherent narrative. I don't think that necessarily at any moment while you're going through your life, you can see the pattern of it all, right? We're all just sort of stumbling around in the dark, and you look backwards and you can say, this is how I got here. But a great deal of that is fiction. But yes, I think that I can see a strong and unifying theme in my life, which I actually believe is a universal theme, which is that, as I said, we're souls in bodies. We are spirit in flesh. And the ways that we feel most real are when we feel both of those simultaneously.
So can you articulate your first communion experience?
Well, it's been a while. I was baptized 14 years ago. But I think what I remember was, I remember walking into this church purely out of curiosity. As I said, I was a reporter, which is kind of you have a license to be nosy and to poke around where you don't belong. So I went there. And, the church service, the readings and the sermons and the singing were perfectly pleasant, but kind of interesting, but not particularly profound. But then when at St. Gregory's, people walk up to the altar together and stand around it in a big group, and somebody passes bread and wine through the crowd. And that experience of being handed a piece of bread and being given a sip of this rather nasty wine was utterly shocking to me, because what I knew was that I was eating actual bread and drinking actual wine. And I also knew that God, who I didn't believe in, was alive, and that God was in my mouth. And it just completely messed me up. I was shocked. I burst into tears. I got out of there as fast as I could because I was afraid a Christian might try to talk to me. And I couldn't reconcile what had happened to me. Something had happened to me that I had not planned and didn't know and didn't expect and didn't understand myself to be looking for at all.
So you don't know what it was about communion that fed you in a way that nothing else could?
Well, I didn't have an intellectual framework for it. It wasn't as if I'd figured out a doctrine and sort of worked my way up to believing a certain set of propositions about the sacraments. It was that something knocked me upside the head in the experience of those sacraments that I was completely unprepared for. As I reflect on it, and as I read about it, and as I tried to talk with other people about it, I mean, it was sort of obvious to me that this is how Jesus actually appears to people, right? He chooses the unprepared, right? He says, ready or not, I'm here. I'm here right now. Come down out of that tree and have supper with me right now. He doesn't wait for people to be ready. He says the kingdom of God is right here. And then he slaps you upside the head.
So how is Jesus flesh and blood? Does communion reflect Jesus' flesh and blood to you?
You know, the experience of communion for me is, it is not otherworldly, but it is not simply having dinner with my friends. It's an opening of space. And almost always I have that experience in the church context of communion, though I think it's possible to have that experience of God's presence with you in the breaking of bread in very different contexts. That's the work that I do, feeding people around that same altar that grew out of my experience of communion. So that I don't think it's necessarily an experience of God that belongs to the church per se. I think it's an experience of God that is available to us when we understand ourselves to be a part of this body.
I've always found it really interesting that on the road to Emmaus, it wasn't the kind of Bible study that Jesus did that caused his disciples to realise who he was, but it was when he broke bread that they realised who he was. And I wondered what it was about communion, if you can articulate this, that touched you in a way that nothing else about Christianity had managed to touch you before.
Well, I think it is what I said before, which is that the point about Christianity isn't that it's it's purely a set of philosophical propositions. It is a religion of incarnation. It is about being human beings in the world. And so the eating and drinking and washing and kissing and touching of Christianity are not sort of decorative flourishes on top of a system of beliefs. They are the way that God comes to us.
And how have you found, since that experience, how did you then find your place at Jesus' meal table alongside other Christians? Because reading your book, you're not necessarily the sort of person that would fit easy into the kind of culture, the subculture of Christianity. So how did you find that?
Well, you know, I'm not the kind of person who's necessarily the easiest to get along with in any kind of subculture, since I'm proud and individualistic and convinced that I'm right all the time. So that makes me not necessarily a prize for anybody to have welcomed into their subculture. But I also think that the words that I heard at my first communion, which the deacon spoke, were words that keep echoing in my life, which are simply, Jesus welcomes everyone to his table. So we offer the bread and wine to everyone without exception. Jesus welcomes everyone to his table. You actually don't have to be a superior kind of person to be a Christian. You certainly don't have to be good. You can be as much of an idiot as Peter is, for example, or me, right? Jesus isn't looking for the smartest, most articulate, best developed, friendliest, all-round good sports activists to be his disciples.
So what did it mean for you then to go from that sort of that isolated experience of Jesus to becoming, in inverted commas, a Christian?
Well, it was a long process, right? And I think becoming a Christian is a life's work. It's not something that happens in a moment and then, bam, you're done, right? It begins a process of ongoing conversion that isn't always pleasant, right? I mean, it's not always pleasant to be changed. But I think that for me, because I had this experience that was so immediate and physical, what I wanted to do was enact and embody that over and over and over again. And so I kept going to the church. I had a very intelligent and manipulative priest who left me alone for months without bothering me or scaring me off, and then said one morning, well, you're always here early and you have a loud voice, so why don't you be one of the people who help serve at the table? And gave me a job, which is a great way to bring people in, to actually give them something to do.
Get them on a rota, that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's like when you go to a dinner party and you're shy, you hang out in the kitchen, right? And he gave me a job. And then I was the person who broke the bread and said, Jesus welcomes everyone to his table. So, and in that experience of handing bread, handing the body of Christ to the body of Christ, I woke up again and thought, this is what I need to do. And so I began a food pantry set up right around that same table, right in the middle of the sanctuary, where every week we would give away literally tons of fresh food to anybody who came, because Jesus welcomes everyone to his table.
You've said that communion changes everything, including religion. Can you unpack that a bit more for us?
Well, I think the way that communion changes everything is precisely because of the universality and the Catholicity of it, that it's impossible to have this meal by yourself, right? This is the only meal in the world you can't buy, and you can't eat it alone, right? So all the business of religion that's about exclusion or boundaries or drawing lines is subverted by this meal that's offered for free to people who don't deserve it, right? To people who aren't prepared for it. And so there's this constant tension, I think, between the power of the sacrament and the anxiety of the institution.
Is there anything that's really surprised you through the whole act of communion?
Oh, everything surprises me.
What surprised you the most, would you say?
Well, I mean, I think the thing is that what is surprising to me is how close God is. That God is actually as close to you as your own breath, as your own mouth. That God is so immediate and so close and so available. And that's actually not separate from your experience of having that meal with other people. And particularly, with other people you didn't choose. It's like you don't get to choose who you're standing next to take communion. But those people are part of the same experience. They're not separate from you.
Yeah, I've never considered that before. That's really interesting that it demands community, doesn't it? Because we always serve each other, don't we, in that act?
Right. It demands community, and of course we don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to deal with other people. I'd rather have this sort of sanctified me and Jesus relationship. But it's not my table.
So would you say that communion is still your primary means of connecting and experiencing Jesus?
Well, I think it opens. I think the experience opens out and makes possible a lot of things, because it actually, I believe, is a door into seeing how sacramental all of life can be, right? That through that most ordinary gesture, it's not a rarefied thing, it's a regular piece of bread and wine, I can begin to see and glimpse God at work in other places in other ways. But yeah, I think it's pretty reliable that if I haul myself to that table week after week, whether or not I want to be there, whether or not I like the people I'm standing next to, whether or not I'm in a good mood, it has nothing to do with my feelings. It has nothing to do with whether or not the people next to me are the people I would have chosen. That something happens for me in that moment that allows me to live.
Sarah, how's communion informed your sense of calling to serve others, would you say?
Here's the thing. I run a food pantry, and so a lot of Christians are always talking to me as if I'm this sort of super nice person who's called to serve others and to be really good. And I just want to make it clear I'm not very good. And I'm not serving others out of some obligation that, oh, that's what we're supposed to do. It's more that I just wanted more. I wanted more of that life. I wanted more of that opening, of that connection. I wanted, what Jesus calls abundant life. And the way that I thought I could get it, I'm pretty literal minded. I opened the food pantry on the same weekend I got baptized, and I promised that I'd continue to share in the breaking of bread. So I thought, oh, okay, I guess I'll do that and see what happens. Because I wanted more.
So your food pantry, over here we call them food banks. It's basically a food distribution centre, isn't it? Right. And yours is connected symbolically in a really strong way with communion, isn't it? Can you explain that to us a bit?
Well, it's actually, as I said, it wasn't set up as a good deed. It wasn't set up as a social service program. It wasn't set up as a political response to the issues of hunger. It was set up as it was modeled on the Eucharist, right? So unlike a lot of church programs and government programs that are all about who can come and do they deserve it and are they ready and are they the right kind of people and how can we manage things, our food pantry was set up modeled on the Eucharist, so it was open to anybody who wanted to come. Right. And it was Jesus welcomes everyone to his table. So we offer groceries to everyone without exception. And because I had been invited into the Christian life by people who said, hey, you're showing up early. Why don't you take a turn doing this and giving me work? I ran the food pantry. The food pantry is run by the people who use it. It's not run by nice church ladies for poor people. It's run by poor people for each other, right? It is a Eucharistic community that is made by the people who are using it. So I think in a lot of ways, what I saw was that the principles of the Eucharistic liturgy could be used as the ground for creating other kinds of communities in other contexts that weren't specifically Christian communities, right? The food pantry isn't only for Christians. It's not run only by Christians. But it embodies those beliefs that Jesus is welcoming everyone to his table. God is welcoming everyone, and God is calling all people into full participation in God's work.
Do you think people who come to use the pantry would be able to make that connection?
Yeah, I think a bunch of them would. I think some of them would articulate it in other ways. We have a range of people. We have Russian Orthodox immigrants and Hindus and a bunch of old Chinese grandmas and a bunch of Salvadoran Catholics and a bunch of black church ladies and a bunch of non-believing punk queer skateboard kids and some homeless guys. And so I can't really speak for the theology of the whole range of people. But I think what people do understand is that the food pantry is a community. And some people will say, this is my church, right? And some people will say, this is my family. And some people will say, this is our community. And that they are acting on those values, which is, we're doing this with each other.
Can you kind of paint us a picture of what it looks like, the whole pantry thing?
I can. You should actually, if you can, you should link to the video because it's kind of amazing to see. So there's the St. Gregory's Church was actually built in 1995, but it's got this huge sort of soaring rotunda with a gigantic, larger than life icon of 90 dancing saints going around it. It's beautiful. It looks sort of Russian, and it's just lovely. And it's bright, and it's got flowers, and it's got these fabulous icons, and it's got a little shrine to Mary in the corner. And in the center of this room, which is otherwise empty except for the icons on the walls, is a table, and that's the altar table. And the table says two things on it. It's got this great gilt lettering on it. On one side, in Greek, there's a quote from Luke's gospel, which says, "This guy eats with sinners." Right? And on the other side, in gilt letters, there's a quote from Isaac of Nineveh, engraved on the table, which says, "Did not our Lord dine with publicans and harlots? Therefore, make no distinction between worthy and unworthy. All must be equal in your eyes, to love and to serve." That's the table in the center. And then around it, in a circle, we pile up the vegetables and the fruit and the rice and the beans. As I said, literally tons, with tables. And people come in and pick. It looks sort of like a farmer's market. As somebody said to me, it looks like a farmer's market in heaven.
Nice. And what have you learnt about God and his meal table from these people?
That the table is always open and the table is always set. And that it's not a question of earning it or deserving it. It's a question of tasting it and seeing.
And have you met with much resistance to kind of freely giving away food, which can also be kind of almost like giving God away freely as well?
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a ongoing struggle. Not so much with the church. I think the church there was resistance when we began, but I think really everyone just understands that it's the enacted table and that it's completely part of our worship. It's what, the Orthodox say that there's the liturgy after the liturgy, right? But, which is feeding people, but it sort of begs the question, which is the liturgy, which is after, right? We've got Sundays and then we've got Fridays, and it just keeps going. And it's quite clear to people in the church it's the same thing. I think that there's a lot of there's an ongoing political struggle in the United States about whether poor people deserve things, and there's a huge amount of anxiety about, well, what if you just give things away? To people who don't deserve them, they'll take advantage of you. And all kinds of racial stuff plays out. All kinds of anxiety about poor people and immigrants play out. There's an ongoing struggle about control. Should you be able to control this? Isn't food isn't right. It's something we can decide whether or not people should have.
I've heard you say that the surest sign of Jesus' real presence in the Eucharist is when there's someone completely inappropriate at the table. Can you unpack that for us?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, right, it's like if everything works perfectly and only the right kinds of people are invited, you don't get crucified.
What I like most about the pantry, having read the story, is that it seems to really effectively collapse that sacred secular divide that can exist through communion, that God isn't far removed, that we don't have to reach him through a priest or an altar or special words or a prayer. He's kind of here with us, he's in the mess with us. Communion seems to really symbolise that nicely, and the way the pantry sort of ties in with that is really beautiful. But I'm guessing your Sunday communion experience is quite traditional in the sense that it is administered to the people by a priest. So how have you come to reconcile that with the kind of the principles of the pantry?
Oh, I think you're completely wrong, actually. I mean, no, as I said, the communion service runs on the same principles as the pantry, right? So yes, a priest is presiding at the altar, but the priest is standing amid the people, like not in a circle, just in a big mob standing around the table. and the priest is singing the Eucharistic prayer, and the people are droning and singing the responses around. And then when it's time to break the bread, all these inappropriate people, a little kid or me or an old lady, are come up to the table and help break the bread and take pattens full of it and carry it out among the crowd. And people are passing wine to one another. So, no, the model of communion is full participation, right? And that we offer communion to everyone.
Another thing that occurred to me is that, I hope this isn't completely wrong, I'm a bit nervous now, that communion's quite easy for the emerging church and sort of, the progressive church to embrace because it is such a beautiful symbol of inclusion. Well, I was wondering how you've come to understand and embrace baptism, because in some ways it potentially, the symbolism is a bit more you're in, you're out, whereas communion is just kind of open to everyone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it does. But obviously this is a big and ongoing discussion in the polity of the church, right? About whether you can have baptism after communion or communion before baptism, or whether you can offer communion to people who aren't baptized. And the whole question of what baptism means to the church, I think, certainly in the United States, is a hot question right now. What does it mean? Who can be baptized? What does it mean to be a member of a church community? What are those responsibilities, right? But I think, so there are questions of what it means to be part of a church and part of a church community and how those churches are ordered, right? And certainly Christians over the years have not been shy of developing thousands and thousands and thousands of different ways to structure what they mean by that, right? Sometimes killing each other in the process, in quarrels over it, right? But I think the thing about baptism is that, in fact, baptism is open to everyone, right? If you are willing to die to yourself, if you're willing to die and pick up a cross and follow, that's what's being offered to you. That's really what's being offered to you. Membership in a particular parish church or a particular denominational structure happens too, but that's not the point of baptism, is to build up separate denominations, right? The point of baptism is to allow people to enter into the mystery of death and new life, right? And that's always available. But it scares the hell out of me. I was baptized after I took communion, and I knew I wanted it, and I knew I was going to kick and scream and resist it as much as I could because it scared the hell out of me. I didn't want to go under that water. I didn't want to die. I liked my life, right? I didn't want to give it up. And yet there was something about that font that was calling me. It was calling me. And, it is available all the time. And I think, one of the great thing about the story of Philip and the eunuch, right, is that, the disciples have to be converted over and over and over again by the understanding that baptism isn't theirs to give, right? The baptism doesn't belong to their ideas about who should get it and on what timetable, right? That the desire to enter into God's life and a little bit of water will do it. And so I think, again, there's always that tension in the church, right, of building up the church and having it subverted and opened up by God, right? And that's the way that God keeps making God's church new, right, is to remind us whose sacraments they are.
And finally, I've had some profound experiences of Jesus through different spiritual practices, but for some reason I've never really had that kind of profound experience of God through communion. So have you got any sort of tips for people that can perhaps relate to me in that?
How to have a mystical experience immediately?
Yeah, but how to kind of...
You could start by eating something that was actually real food, instead of like one of these completely abstracted little wafers.
Yeah, that doesn't help, definitely. Yeah, it doesn't really ground it in reality, eating one of those things, does it?
Right. But, again, I think, that's the point, right? The Spirit speaks to each one of us in our own language. That's how the Spirit works among us. But, so I don't think that there's actually a magic secret to it, except to say, what do you think you're doing when you're doing it? And, I have to say, I've heard both of you talking, and, I'm not sure I agree with the word symbol so much.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think if it's a symbol, it can be hard. And if it's real, if my flesh is real food, is a disturbing thing for Jesus to say. But to experience the reality of the food is to experience the reality of the presence of God.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, Sarah, thank you so much. That's a great place to finish as well. And thanks so much for your time. And again, that's given us loads to think about.
Yeah, it's definitely worth the wait to speak to you.
Terrific, guys. Thank you both so much for making the time to do this at the end of the day.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Thank you, Sarah.
All right. Blessings.
So, Tim.
Third time lucky.
Yeah, we got there.
She let us down at Greenbelt. She cancelled the last Skype interview. So was it worth it?
It was definitely worth it.
She's smart, isn't she?
Yeah.
Some really interesting insights there. Not afraid to disagree with us.
No, how did you feel about being told that you were wrong?
I was shocked to the core of my being.
I was I was under myself. I was thinking, oh, Tim has been told he's wrong.
I still...
I don't think it was about... It was to do with the way the question was worded.
Probably. It was a poorly worded question. No, but I think... So she was basically saying... So I was sort of raising the issue about the kind of priest standing between us and God, because he's the one that administers communion.
Yeah.
And she was saying, oh no, because he kind of moves among us and, we're still free to come to the table. But I think the fact that you would say he still moves among us and he still joins in the liturgy with us, it's just the fact that you say that says that there's something different about him. Because you wouldn't say that about anyone else, would you?
Yeah.
So I still hold to the fact that...
You're right.
Well, not so much that I'm right, but the whole idea of communion is that it's God's meal and the table is open for anyone to come to.
Yeah.
But if you have to come to that table via a priest, then you're limited, aren't you? The table's only open at certain times. It's only open when the priest is available. It's only open to people in that building. Do you know what I mean? That to me just kind of that is the opposite of what communion symbolises.
That's true.
I think personally.
No, I think you're right.
And her second point of disagreement, or that she picks up, and I've just done it again, used that word symbolism. I did think that was helpful, actually.
Yeah, it was.
That we kept saying communion symbolises this, it symbolises that. And she was saying, well, actually, maybe one of the reasons you're not connecting with it is because for you it's purely symbolic. It's not real. And if you try and take away that feeling that this is just symbolic, then you might have a deeper connection with God.
So is she meaning that the bread and the wine is actually the body of Jesus?
I don't know. I mean, she seemed, I don't know.
Or does she mean that we just need to come to communion as a way of connecting with God, that we're eating a meal with God as part of... So it's not symbolic. It's about actually being part of a community.
Yeah.
It's a common meal, rather than seeing it as symbolic in that way, that we're actually joining in a meal together with God.
Quite possibly. It's a nice way of putting it. Yeah, quite possibly. I didn't get from her book that she was coming from that sort of more traditional Catholic place of saying this is actually Jesus, that he's being sacrificed again on the altar. But for her, it is very much a meal, and it's very much a community activity. And you are, in a very real sense, connecting with God.
But the interesting thing is that when she first experienced God through communion as an atheist, it wasn't round a table, was it? It was actually, by the sounds of it, she actually went forward and took a wafer, and the way she described the way she took communion.
Yeah.
So it wasn't actually a meal.
No.
She went forward for communion because she talks about having this wafer and this horrible tasting wine. So she had that experience of God through that way of communion rather than round a meal table together. So
Who knows? Interesting though. Something for us to unpack.
yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how you kind of come away from having that interview and those sort of questions you kind of would like her to delve into more now.
Well, it's up for us, isn't it, to kind of unpick it and
Yeah,
think
it's
it through.
always to have something to think about, isn't it?
Yeah.
rather
Always
than
leave your
having the
audience.
answers.
Always leave your audience wanting more.
Yes.
My first deeply negative experience of church related to communion.
I can imagine.
So maybe that is part of my issue. Let me tell you the story. I'll keep it brief because this is our second reflection on this part. We have our kind of fake reflection. So I got persuaded by some friends to start going to a Baptist church youth group. That was one of my first sort of experiences of church as a teenager. And I can't remember if it was their band or they were having a band come into the church. And so we wanted to set up the church space a bit differently for this band. So me and my mate naively just walked into the kind of worship space, picked up the communion table and took it over to the side.
Oh no!
I know. And just as the church minister walked in, and he absolutely flipped. I mean, he just flew into a rage, just saying, "How dare you touch the communion table, the sacred table?" And so we just put the table down and walked out. And I didn't go back to church for, probably getting close to a decade after that. Yeah. And one of the reasons were partly the shock of just being shouted at by, in inverted commas, a man of the cloth. Yeah. I just kind of thought, for me, it was that sacred secular divide of just thinking, is God more interested in that table than he is in me or in the band or what we were trying to plan for that evening? Yeah. I just thought, if that's what church is like, I'm not bothered.
I'm not surprised. I think God had done the same.
So maybe I need to get past that as well to sort of
some
enjoy
inner healing. You need from
some inner healing and emotional wholeness is required. I had a friend over yesterday, and his dad occasionally goes to church, but doesn't like communion. So at the end of the service, when they have communion, he gets his newspaper out, just sits there and reads his newspaper.
I know communion is, in the traditional way of doing communion, it's a very strange thing to do, certainly if you're not used to doing it. And there is quite a scary thing about going up the front and, where do you hold your hands for the bread and, all that stuff. So it can almost be off-putting rather.
And it is often one of those things that's just tagged on to the end of the service, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it is done in a way that emphasises the symbolic nature of it, and perhaps again that's why I find it hard to connect. Well, I haven't said that in our community. We literally just do it
over a meal.
Yeah. So it's not. Maybe we don't emphasise it enough, but we just eat bread and drink juice, and then we go on to eat the meal, don't we? And it's just kind of a natural part of what our community does when it gets together.
Yeah. It sounds like that's what she was talking about. What she does within the pantry. Is that it's just food rather than... That's what I was kind of picking up.
Yeah. Interesting as well, the whole idea of baptism, isn't it? And how baptism can appear more exclusive, can't it? Whereas the kind of the communion table is open to anyone. Whereas certainly the church that I went to and I was baptised, you had to do classes first to kind of make sure you got your doctrine right, and then there's like a kind of a period of preparation. You got interviewed by someone to kind of check out you're a proper Christian. And then when a certain day rolled round, you could then be baptised. And because it was a Baptist church, you couldn't be a member of the church unless you'd actually been baptised. So it's just like one barrier after another, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I remember someone saying once who they kept asking, this guy was a really gifted, really spiritual guy, and the leadership were desperate for him to be on the leadership team, but he wasn't baptised because he was christened as a kid, so he didn't feel he had to go through it again, and they were literally saying to him, please just get baptised so that you can become part of the members, become a member of the church and get on the leadership team. And he basically said, and I thought this was absolutely genius, he said, you're making it harder for me to serve on this church than it is for me to get into heaven.
Yeah.
And I thought that's so true, isn't it?
Yeah.
You get into, what does it take to follow Jesus? Nothing.
Yeah,
Just believe in Jesus and just start to follow him. But he had to jump through all these hoops to become, in inverted commas, a proper Christian and a member of the church.
But that's interesting as well, isn't it? Because for some people who've been christened, some people will say, well, you don't need to be baptised again because you've already, so therefore it'll be a second baptism, so therefore you shouldn't be baptised.
It's a minefield,
It
isn't it?
isn't it? Yeah.
It's a minefield.
Yeah. So how does anybody ever get into...
We get ourselves tied up in knots,
We
don't
do,
we,
yeah.
in the old church. There's some interesting reflections there. Just thinking back to our interview with Richard Raw, I shared my idea about male accuracy.
I wondered if you were going to bring that up.
Male accuracy at night.
Yes.
I've had to let that idea go.
Really?
Yeah, David said, why don't you have a light, motion-sensitive light on your toilets? When you walk in, a little light comes on.
Right.
And then Tom said, look, mate, just sit on the toilet.
That's what I do.
So I've cancelled my appearance on Dragon's Den.
Okay.
It's all over.
I was actually going to suggest as well that if you wanted to invent anything, what about adult nappies? It saves you getting out of bed altogether.
Indeed. What other podcast gives people this? Do you know what I mean? It's not just deep, profound theological insight. But the thing is, discipleship is every area of life, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So male accuracy at night, that's a very real part of life, isn't it? So why not discuss that issue?
Exactly.
But not everyone was impressed. My brother-in-law wasn't impressed by that rambling.
Wasn't he?
I just got a text saying that wasn't needed.
I think it's one or two other people probably.
Yeah.
I'd probably turned off now as well.
But interestingly, Angie, who's a regular listener, she said that our ramblings are quite helpful because it gives her time to make a cup of tea, sort the dishes out before she settles down to listen to the interviews.
I wonder how many other people do that.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to know. How many people are listening to ramblings?
But it also makes me think, how long do people need our ramblings to be so that they can make a cup of tea and sort a few bits out before the proper stuff starts?
Yeah. And of course, this is now the end of the interview. People are probably even switched off.
Well, this is our second reflection as well.
Yeah.
So perhaps that wasn't the most professional ramblings, but we're not particularly professional. Having said that, we're trying to become a bit more professional. We're having a new website made.
Yeah.
Matt has been working on it for 10 months now. Well, actually, he did a couple of days on it about 10 months ago.
So what you're saying is we're trying to look more professional.
We're trying to look, even if we're
not professional.
Not professional, the very least we can do. I mean, a lot of church, it's all about branding, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you look the part,
Yeah.
then you're okay, aren't you?
Isn't that what being a Christian is as well?
Trying to look the part, yeah. You're just a hopeless sinner on the inside, but when you turn up to church on Sunday,
right,
you
yeah.
look the part.
Yeah.
We don't often do this, but we can tell people that next time they hear us, we'll be in Oxford. Because we're going to interview Alistair McGrath and then a woman called Jenny Williams after that. So
that's very organised.
It is very organised. We don't often sort of know what we're doing, but Skype is great. Skype is a great blessing, but it's good to get back on the road, isn't it?
It is.
So we'll be heading off to...
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, so that should be good. The other thing I should mention is had a baby.
Oh, yes!
So I've had
in between the intro that we did, because obviously it was
this was split. So the half of this was recorded, I don't know, August at Greenbelt. She didn't turn up, and now we're into October. And in that interim, I managed to eventually get round to having a kid.
Well,
so I've got a kid, and you've got a new van.
Yeah.
So we've both got new additions to the family, haven't we?
Yeah.
So that's good.
My van's probably easier to look after, though.
Yeah, little Elliot, he's fine. He didn't take much. Well, I don't have to do much.
That's sweet.
He just eats and sleeps. He's pretty cool. It's been really good for the podcast, actually, because he'll eat, fall asleep, then Hannah will go off for her nap. I'll sit with him, and then I'll start sort of tweaking and fiddling with the podcast and the website, and chasing up who we're going to interview next. Yeah. We've got very special. We're working on something very special for Christmas, and I can tell you confidently that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had a child, because I used my 2 weeks paternity leave to set up something that we'd never have normally had time to do for Christmas. So Elliot inadvertently will have blessed all our listeners.
It's quite appropriate, isn't it?
Because our Christmas extravaganza wouldn't have happened if I didn't have paternity leave.
Yeah, baby boy being born.
It's perfect. And it's brought blessing to the whole world.
Yes.
It's absolutely perfect, isn't it? But our listeners are going to have to wait a couple of months, obviously, before they can enjoy that.
There's a film being made called The Life of Elliot.
Good. Right, we need to wrap this up. Hopefully this reflection is giving people to make a post-interview cup of tea or coffee.
Yeah.
So hopefully we've given them...
They've gone.
Left.
I wonder how many people are left listening. It'd be good if we could see live stats, wouldn't it? And see actually how they drop off. Real-time stats. That's what we need. I'll try and get the new website to include some real-time stats.
It could be heartbreaking.
Do sign up to, if you're a regular listener, or if you're an irregular listener, sign up, like us on Facebook and on Twitter, because that is really helpful for us, actually, because doing this is a bit detached, because we're just speaking into nothingness, aren't we? We don't know who's listening.
Community, online community.
It's really those people who regularly kind of likes or say something on Facebook. It is a real blessing to us, because it sort of puts a face to our audience, because we don't know who's listening, who they are, if anyone's listening, and so it's quite nice to get that sense there's some real people out there. Yeah. So if you haven't liked us on Facebook, I'd encourage you to do that, just for our benefit. It might bless you as well. I don't know. It'll definitely bless us. So it'd be good if you could do that.
Good.
Great. We'll see you in Oxford in a couple of weeks.
For more about Nomad, check out nomadblog.co.uk.